racial equity lens and a racial justice lens. So I'm excited to be here, and I just wanted to thank you again. That's all for me. Holly, you're on mute, just to let you know.
We will move on to Thu Nguyen. Did I pronounce that right, Thu?
Yes, thank you, Holly.
From OCA.
Morning or afternoon, everyone. I'm calling from Houston, so it's still 11 o'clock here. So I'm Thu Nguyen, a director at OCA Asian Pacific American Advocates. I also was just appointed director back in September, but we are the second oldest Asian American civil rights organization in the US. We were founded in 1973 as the Organization of Chinese Americans. Really, it started around kind of the death of Vincent Chin, which, you know, was an act of anti-Asian hate. Vincent Chin in Detroit was mistaken as a Japanese man when in reality he was a Chinese man, and he was beaten to death. And so that's kind of the start of our organization, organizing around that civil rights. But in 2013, we actually rebranded to just be OCA APA Advocates because we wanted to be Pan-Asian, because Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are the fastest growing immigrant group in America, actually. And, you know, we need to fight for civil rights for, you know, the entire API community. That's the abbreviation we use. And so since 2013, we faced kind of growing pains of adjusting from being a predominantly Chinese American civil rights organization to really encompassing and embracing the needs of all Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. I think one of the unique things about the AAPI community is that we have many different ethnicities within our group and then different waves of immigration. And so in order to come together as one voice and stand in solidarity with other communities of color, with Black women, Latina women, Native American women, we first have to come together within our own group. And so it's kind of two ways of obstacles that the API community faces and that OCA tries to bring together. We have 50 chapters and affiliates across the country in 24 states. And it's really interesting to have, you know, you have a 5th generation Chinese American right now in the same OCA chapter as a Burmese immigrant who just came in the past 2 or 3 years. And so we really have been working on trying to bridge these different generations of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and their understanding of their political identity. Because when you're a new immigrant, the first that you're thinking of really is just survival. You don't really think about civil rights yet. And so a lot of what we try to do too is educating our community, because they have to understand their political identity before even understanding like the politicization of being an Asian American or Pacific Islander women. You know, that the additional layer of being a woman of color in America is almost even the last thing that a lot of us will think about. And I don't know if you can tell, but I represent the millennial / Gen Z, you know, community here as well, I think. And for us, fortunately, you know, younger API women, we are fortunate to understand the different intersectionalities that Christian had mentioned, you know, that we are like women of color, descendants of immigrants. And so now what a lot of our work is really organizing the different generations to come together as one voice and then stand in solidarity with our other marginalized communities. So yeah, that's just a little about OCA and what we worked on.
Holly?
Thank you too. Let's go to Alana. Do you have Sheila on your line?
Sheila was having some problems with Zoom, but said she was going to call in. Sheila, are you there?
Let's see.
I haven't seen her name come up.
Yeah, she was having some problems. That's why I went off. And
it must be us people in Virginia. That's it. I don't know.
Do you know the area code of her phone?
7:03, 7:03.
Yes.
We also are at 100 participants. I'm not sure if,
Okay, well, why don't we keep going and we'll
Okay.
come back to Sheila once she gets on.
Okay. Should we go to the second question, which,
Yeah, so
Lot
I will just say good afternoon to everyone and thank you for your participation today. I thought that this was a very timely subject, and we have several questions that we're going to pose to our panelists today. And I'll just start off with the first one. Please share with us factors that you think affect success of the feminists or various women organizations and barriers to success. Please share your perspective with us on factors that affect the success of the organization and barriers to success. Particularly women, feminist organizations, intergenerational organizations. And I'll just say Christian, and two, we'll start with you since you started off, Christian.
Okay, great. So I'll start. Well, I think that it's, feminist organizations are like many organizations, but I think when we look at feminist organizations, we know right now there are 4 waves of feminism, right? And in those waves, there were different issues that kind of presented during feminism and why the movement started. And I think that within those movements, because of the issues that faced the women who started those movements, I think sometimes people can become very rigid on why they joined a movement. And I also think that sometimes people join movements because they are facing grievances, like they are aggrieved for reasons, they were wronged or something happened to them that caused them to join a movement to fight a movement. And I think sometimes people can get stuck in their grievance. And so as we kind of continue moving through a movement, when the next wave starts, sometimes those waves don't mesh well. There's no smooth acceptance or succession or community solidarity within the movements or the waves that continue to happen. And so, like you kind of hear about the old guard, new guard, theory. And I think that happens even within the feminist movement, that's happened. And so then you have new people come in and they want to be a part of a movement. And then they're saying, wait, no, that's not what our movement was really about. And so then people feel excluded and they feel left out. So then there has to be a point where we have to start really understanding, and I think this is the big barrier of movements, and this has been a barrier of the feminist movement. And I think this is where we've seen, particularly back when the movement started too, where we had women of color who felt excluded from the movement, right? And especially Black women, I know felt excluded, and like Latinx women felt excluded from the movement when it first started. And even, it's really interesting because even though I'll use Now, for example, Now had some Black women who helped co-found the movement, but at some point, and some lesbian women who helped co-found the movement, but then at some point, lesbian women felt they weren't accepted in the movement. And so did Black women felt they weren't accepted in the movement, even though they were some of the ones who helped co-found Now. So even at some point, they were excluded from the movement, but although they were some of the co-founders. And it's because the ideologies of people saying, well, we started this movement, and once we become in power and control, feel like they start switching the movement to their perspective of why they're there. And I think that's when we start seeing exclusion happen. Instead of embracing the difference and diversity of our membership and looking at diversity as powerful and beautiful, the complexity of us, we start looking at it as it's not important or it's not what we're looking for, so we push it out. And I think that's what happens in movements. And that's what's happened as a barrier to the feminist movement. And then we don't have succession planning. And I think this is something that happens in a lot of movements. There's no succession planning. People hold on to power as long as possible. And they don't want a succession plan. They don't want to bring in new leaders. They don't want to train younger women, younger feminists to come in and train them to take in power and teach them how to become new leaders. People want to hold on to power as long as possible. They want to continue. And so that becomes a problem too, because then eventually we have to pass the torch. And it's not even, and I think it has to be a sharing of the torch, right? So as I'm growing and I'm learning, I need to start sharing that torch and training up other young feminists in the process and training and teaching what I know, and not feeling like it's a competition and not feeling like it becomes you or me, but there's a sharing because this knowledge has to grow, and I have to share with other feminists in the process so that they can also continue to educate other feminists, and we share our knowledge so we continue to go. I think that's part of the barrier. The strengths of the feminist movement is there is so much rich history. There's so much brilliance. There's so much experience that is so, it has such like vitality to it that it continues to live on through all this time, right? Like the experience of what women have been experiencing kind of permeates through all times, and the experiences can like live on. So lessons that, I mean, like, you know, we still talk about like things from like old, like the original founders of feminists, we still talk about to this day. And what they taught us, we still can teach our current feminists in the fourth wave from the first wave. And although it's changing, those are still important lessons that we can teach. And so I think there's value in the history that can be passed down. And I think that there's also some serious like shared, I think there is a way to like really share strategies that have worked and been effective that we also can continue to nurture throughout the history. So it's just like interesting, like I have just become like really good friends with a co-founder of NOW through this process, you know, and, you know, we have there's probably like a 50-year generation age gap between us, but we still have that connection of NOW and what we believe in. So the belief of NOW and the feminist movement connects us. And so I think that's the beauty of NOW and what connects the feminist movement and what we still can hold on to. The commonalities keep us moving and going forth.
Okay.
So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Thu?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have a lot to add to what Christian said about just the obstacles in these organizations and in the movement. I think I echo that their succession planning is really important. I think when, you know, for at least for the API community, when you're so new to organizing as well, a lot of folks just see the end goal of, you know, passing certain legislation or achieving certain things. I think women's rights and, you know, equity is a long journey. And then, so there needs to be a culture of like succession planning and passing down knowledge that I think organizationally, like standard procedures wise needs to be built. And I think that's something that we're all still working on. But like Christian also shared your story about, you know, being friends with a co-founder of NOW. I think that is really valuable, and at least for women and women of color, is that there is kind of that nurturing between generations and a desire to pass on that knowledge, right? That you don't see within like the larger kind of advocacy organizing space. And I think that's really valuable. Yeah, sorry, I'm just still absorbing everything that Christian said, but yeah, kind of just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Holly?
Yes, Alana.
I thought Holly has
We
some
have-
next question.
Oh, I was gonna say, do we have Sheila? When you find Sheila to weigh in, we'd love to hear from her. We'll just keep.
She said she was going to call in. Sheila, are you there?
She's here. She's here.
Yes.
Okay,
Oh,
good.
great.
Sheila.
So Sheila, the question is, what are the factors that you believe affect the success of an organization, and what are barriers to success? We're asking for your perspective, feminist women organizations.
Visibility, number one. I think having people diverse within the organization brings a different perspective that you may not have thought of, that's more inclusive. And I think in the very beginning, when we first started, it was because of our being Black women with specific agendas were not necessarily included in the larger majority of women. And it was more germane to our needs because of often not having the opportunity to be involved in a lot of the discussions that pertain to women across the board. And for us as women of color and or more so Black women, it was a double whammy. And in that sense, what we meant by that was not only because of the gender, but also because of the color of the skin or the race. And so it was having to fight two battles. And the ultimate goal, of course, is to look at one, to be one, but still we all have unique perspectives that we bring to any society or any group. And we should be learn how to be more cognitive of those differences because we have more commonalities, I feel, as women, to be able to produce positive results in the sense of a better society. So that would be one of my major, I think it still today holds true that it saddens us that we have to still have different ethnic groups fighting for the same fair chance, but it's through education that we'll all learn better on how to improve the status of women across the board, whether it's in housing, it's in equity, and it's in economics, it's always all the healthcare, the whole gamut. So, and I apologize again for the technology on my part. I'm looking at my camera, but it's showing only me, and I don't look pretty.
I just wondered if you could go back, Sheila, and tell everyone a little of your background, because it was so filled with inclusion. Could you share a little bit about
Black Women United for Action?
Please?
Okay, in the sense of we started, it's hard to believe, almost 35 years ago, and it was based on living in Fairfax County. And we had some of the most notable educated women and who were not involved in the overall management of the government, society, and et cetera, other than in the education field, in which we were still fighting because segregation had not long been disbanded here, and which meant that it was harder for our kids to have Black teachers and Black educators in the sense of perspective of seeing someone that looked like them. Most of the schools were African American, as you know from history, were closed if it had the African American names on it, and we were bused and sent to white predominant schools. And this happened to be, I still say, one of the most highly educated home at the time of Black women. And we just set out to change that, and we did. Sadly, I just heard in a discussion yesterday by one of our colleagues on this call that Montgomery County only had the one Black or zero Black judges. Up until December, just last month, we had only one female in 26 years. And thank God we just had two Black women, a Latino woman and a Black woman as of last Monday, accepted, nominated, and will be the circuit court judge, two judges. So things are moving, but it's, again, if we don't talk about it, we won't know about it. And so that's how we started with Fairfax County, but it just grew. And when we found the need was everywhere. And from there, we branched out, and we wanted to make sure that it was the compass of women, particularly those who did not have a voice. that's how we ended up in the different areas of working with women, and particularly the National Council of Women's Organizations. We were involved in that for, many years on the executive board with that. And it opened other doors and having an opportunity to see change and growth in the sense of trying more for equity and fairness, and looking at the agenda of the next generation, with the generations that I'm older. I would like to think the years went by so fast that we did bring about change. And because of that was because we talked about it. And I just thought and still think through our partnership, one of the partnerships was with the Mount Vernon Ladies Association of the Union, very conservative group of women. And over the last 30 years, we've partnered with them. And I can see growth for both of us in that alone in just recognizing a wrong that is every day and every opportunity and every year, it becomes greater and greater to know the history. And that's one. And the other part, I think, as far as educating the families of children that would not have a chance, we did I think the greatest one, a lot of too, has been to send 13 little Black boys on to St. Augustine's College in Raleigh, North Carolina. And these kids had come from federally subsidized housing. And we did it with low key. We did it in the sense of it was our responsibility to do it. And there are so many successes in it that we were asked to go to New York and to Florida to duplicate the program, in which we did. And again, having the opportunity to come together because the need in the community drove us. And because of that, even though it was high income area as Montgomery County, we still had poverty pockets in areas of need. We still do. But the whole point is I'm amazed at what talented women can do, put together with the minds of the same mindsets, to help, to reach out, to make it better. And that's how we got started. And we've been kind of running up until the last 4 years. It's been a major struggle, but I think we're all ready for this new administration and an opportunity for the generation to just expand in its need and growth, and that we'll be there to give them wisdom and guidance. Right?
Okay. Right. Okay. So that was great. Thank you for getting on, Ms. Coates.
Sorry about it.
No problem. Holly, you want to go
Yes,
with the next?
this is great that we have some questions written down, because I've got a million questions that I would like to ask too. But the next question was, can you cite examples of including women and minorities in organizations?
What steps have you taken? Yeah.
Yes, what steps? Thank you. Should we keep the same order, Christian to Sheila? Is that okay?
Sure. Christian, you take a lead. I'll listen.
Okay. Sure. So for us, what we actually just are launching this new program right now, partnership with Black Women's Blueprint, which we're calling the 100 days, the first 100 days of the Feminist Agenda listing series. And it is our way of just really reaching out to women in the community and feminists around, to really find out firsthand and hear their narratives or their experiences regarding our 6 core issues and from their perspectives. So we are having listening sessions. Our first one is actually this Thursday, and it's regarding the experience of COVID and how it's impacted particularly BIPOC, TGNC women, and marginalized groups of women. So we really can hear from them firsthand. I'm really excited about the partnership. Black Women's Blueprint has done some amazing work. We're regarding reproductive justice for Black women. So we are really trying to make sure that we are being intentional to uplift the narratives and experiences of women of color, and make sure we're hearing them. We've heard before, sometimes in the past, women of color have not been heard. So we want to make sure that we're being intentional of hearing, listening, not trying to tell the story for them, but listening and hearing firsthand their stories and their perspectives. And I think that's important as allies. I think it's important to be in solidarity, that you don't try to define the story, that you listen and let individuals define their own story. So this is what we're trying to do through this initiative and this agenda and this campaign. And we're going through different topics. Our topics range from police brutality and accountability, say her name, through a maternal, Black maternal mortality and accountability and, equitable health, through climate justice as a racial justice issue. We have economic, we have the ERA and how equal, quality and importance of the vote. So we are covering a lot of just different topics that we feel we are uplifting the voice of the marginalized communities and communities of color and every other feminist as well. It's an inclusive event, but this is our way of just hearing firsthand the experience of everyone, how we can be inclusive. That's one way. Another way of what we're trying to do is we started a racial justice educational series this year, where we're bringing in speakers who would just be really offering different trainings and different topics to just provide education. We really believe that we have to do the work if we're going to be intentional allies. We first have to do our own work internally. You can't be an ally if you don't do your own work, right? And check your own bias. So you have to do your own bias and check our own work first. And then also, hear firsthand from people who are experienced living and doing this work every single day, so that we can be great intersectional allies. So that is something else that we've started this year. So we'll be having those series going, and it'll be open to anybody who wants to participate in those as well. It's not just members of NOW, but also open to the public. So that's another way that we are trying to be inclusive and just really essentially uplift voices and just experiences and make sure that we're doing work. And I think, I think those are probably the major two programs that we're doing this year. I think that we're really proud of, that NOW is doing, where we're really listening and paying attention to the voices of membership and asking for their perspectives. And so it helps us shape our policy. And with the 100 Days of Feminist Agenda, we do plan on turning that into a policy manual so that we can put it together and send it on up to the Biden-Harris administration as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thu?
Yeah,
Please.
awesome.
Thank you.
That's a lot of really exciting work, Christian. So we're excited to watch that as well. I noticed Jeanette Lim Esbrook had shouted out Vice President Kamala Harris as being, the first women, but also Black and Asian and Indian American to be vice president. And yeah, indeed, she's become a symbol for us. And we have been pushing the Biden administration, us amongst the API organizations, that we've noticed there's good diversity amongst the cabinet secretary positions, but there hasn't been Asian American representation in the cabinet secretaries for the first time in a very long time. And so we're continuing to push the administration to keep in mind that in order to fulfill his promise of diversity and inclusion and bringing together our country, his appointments need to reflect that. And our country is 50%, over 50% women and a lot of APIs. And so we continue to push the administration as they are putting out executive orders and appointing more folks. But But in terms of answering the question on like the steps to ensure inclusion of all women, I think that just really starts with Christian mentioned just being intentional about bringing in the different communities of color, women of color, and they're bringing in different stakeholders of all ages. So actually, I think this panel is a really good example because I know Holly and Alada were specific about making sure there was representation of all ages as well. And for OCA, we're actually in March, which is, International Women's Month. It's important to be conveners, right? I think we all have to take an initiative to convene these communities because not all of the movements and organizers will take the initiative to convene. And so we're partnering with the Center for APA Women in Kapaa to put on a multicultural women's summit with the Boys and Girls Club of America, the Native American Women's Association. I forget the full name of that, but we're excited in March to put on a week-long summit, bringing together different women of color to discuss topics around COVID, around empowerment, around space, because in COVID times, as we're all working virtually at home, we've been facing a lot of issues with giving ourselves space as we continue to do our organizing work, but also have responsibilities, to our families if we're caring for our families, because the society still places a lot of that responsibility on women. And so just being really intentional about including all different women of different ages in those kinds of conversations and how we can support each other and like share our stories and give advice and learn from each other. I think, providing the space to have those conversations is also a really important step for inclusion. And so, I think that's what I have to share.
Thank you too. Would Sheila like to add anything to the question of can you cite steps taken to ensure inclusion in women of ages and diversity?
I'm listening to these two young, smart ladies, and think you pretty much said pretty much what it would be as far as looking at the intergenerational portion of it. Again, from experience is the visibility, as you just expressed, but I think it's also important, just a side note, that we support, not just asking for the Biden administration to reflect what it looks like, America looks like within its cabinet, but to support the efforts and of learning how to support and to protect what they are doing so that we can continue this within our own country and our own society, the visibility and reflection of what America looks like, and that in leadership and upper leadership, that it maintains that way. We have to support them. And what do you mean by that would be also in our work environments to encourage and that it's diverse, and that it starts, all politics are local, is local, and that we continue to see in leadership that the diversity should reflect also from your neighborhood. So how do you do that? Just encouraging people to get involved. For instance, my neighbor is an arborist, and he hadn't even thought about possibly with the talent that he has until I recommended him. I said, well, you should be on the local town council with all your expertise. I mean, you're sharing it with us. Why not on a greater role? He'd not thought about it. And sure enough, this is, to me, the one of the ways in which you can diversify within yourselves. Just let us be advocates and let us be ambassadors to continue looking around in our neighborhoods and the strength within our own women's organizations to recommend women and others with expertise in a particular area to go further outside of just the home, but to share their knowledge. And I think that's one way of, of understanding. For instance, I'll just say the state of Virginia, when we first started, had very few Black women on corporate boards, but more so on educational state institutions. And that was one of the first outreach that we did, was to get women, Black women, on state-supported universities. And I remember they said, well, the governor does that. And I had asked at the time, well, who's the governor? And then we had to learn from step by step how to do it. And sure enough, when the governor turned around and said, well, do you have any recommendations? We said, oh, yes. And we flooded the neighbors and organizations to send recommendations for individuals to serve on state boards and state commissions, especially the university boards. And thankfully, we brought about change, and it did happen. So I'm saying all of us can play a party in the diversity in the sense of recommendations and et cetera. And we know where the talent is. So as far as looking at the change, well, wouldn't it be boring if everyone thought the same and looked the same?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so, because we have the capacity as women to know where talent is, and we should also reach out and recommend that, to share that. Am I right?
Correct.
Yep.
And that kind of leads
Thank
into
you.
our next question. Thank you. As women, we tend to embrace diversity because we understand that different opinions and different backgrounds and perspectives enriches the environment and products. So we'd like for you panelists to share with us, how do you as an individual or even as an organization encourage inclusion, a positive environment, and discourage a negative environment? You've kind of said some of that already, but how do you encourage inclusion, a positive environment, and discourage a negative environment?
Point taken.
Christian?
Well, I've shared mine.
So for me, I think, one of the things I always try to do is kind of like, I really just encourage people like to be authentic, and just be themselves. That's like the best way for me to start with encouraging inclusion. And then just making sure there's representation. And I know, there's always the hashtag representation matters. I know it's very common, but I think it's real and it's truthful. And I, always think about like my experience growing up, as a Black woman, and just remembering how it felt being in a room and being the only person of color in rooms, and also remembering feeling it felt like being spoken over, white-splained, mansplained, silenced, or I'm giving an idea and then everyone looking at me like they didn't understand what I said, and then 2 seconds later, someone said the same thing I said, and everyone's like, "Oh, no, it's a great idea," and I'm like, "I just said that,"
Yep.
So, and
Been there, done that. Understand.
Yeah, and the fact that I have 2 master's degrees from Ivy League school, and people questioning my master's, like, "Where'd you go to school?" I say Columbia University. They're like, "Columbia University?" And I'm saying, Columbia University, like the country Columbia, or just minimizing, and just understanding what that feels like, and so I think that, or just fighting hard, or going to, interviews and having people overlook me in the room, not recognize, well, one, my name's Christian, but just overlooking me, not thinking that a Black woman would be qualified enough to be in a position of executive level. So just knowing the importance of why inclusion is needed for safety. It's important for people to feel safe. And inclusion is needed for a person to feel safe. There has to be inclusion. There has to be representation in all levels. There has to be more than one woman in a room. There has to be more than one person of color in a space. There has to be more than one member of a marginalized community in a space. that creates safety, that creates a safe space for people to thrive. And maybe it's part of my social work background and being a therapist, but I'm just thinking about what it creates for us at the same time. And it's like, we have to think about what that means, when we're having businesses and we want people to speak up and we want people to be productive and we want people to thrive, and what it means for productivity for your company as well. If you want that, you have to create that environment for that. You don't want people to feel isolated. You don't want people to feel siloed. You want people to feel part of the team. And the best way to do that is create a space for them to feel safe and the way they can speak up and be part of a team. And I think you have to put yourself in people's shoes. Even if you were just a woman only working in an all-male place, think about how you felt when you were mansplained, even as a white woman, right? Think about how you felt being in a situation, maybe when you were mansplained and just looked over because you were a woman and weren't listened to. So you have to think about how maybe a woman of color might feel that way. Or maybe think about how a person from a trans, gender non-conforming person might feel that way. You have to think about, or maybe a person from both communities, a person of color who's transgender non-conforming, might feel that way. Or a person with disabilities might feel that way. We have to think about how all these intersections affect inclusion and why it's important that we create space in our organizations and in our businesses and our corporations and our organizations where it creates a safe space for people to thrive and help us also carry out our goals for our organization. And it makes us more successful in the end. So that's how I look at it going into it. And I think that's the best way to look at it. Do we always get it right and perfect? Absolutely not. Perfection does not exist, but we have to continue to try. And we have to continue to make efforts, and we have to continue to do check-ins and see what's working and what's not. And we have to try not to take things personal, and just know that we are working for our best. And we have to look at it from a we perspective and not an I perspective. And that's also what I try to do. I try to be like, I. I'm not here for I, I'm here for we. I'm here for now, not for Christian. So that's how I try to approach it as well.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I want to say something. Can I say something? I was a school teacher for over 25 years, and I didn't have a lot of discipline problems in my classroom because the first day of school, I told the students that we are all different individuals. We are all talented. We all have something that we are good at. And that's why I am here. I'm your teacher to find out what you're good at and to bring out your talents. And we all have to respect everyone in here. And when we see someone's talents, we respect those talents, and we bring them out as part of the group. And I would tell them, everybody knew about Walt Disney. I would say how Walt Disney made his corporation, and he know how to do something. He would always go out and find the best person with the expertise to come into his organization to make it better. And that's what we have to do. We have to appreciate people's talents, respect their talents, find out what they can do, and help them to incorporate into the organization their talents to make it better.
Amen.
That's how I kept my classroom under control and everybody respecting everybody's individual talents and their what they had.
Two?
Yeah, that's, I really want to just +1 affirm that, Beverly. And just to add on, Beverly and Christian's comments, I think what a lot of like younger folks and younger women entering the organizing space is they sometimes feel imposter syndrome. I think that's a term that's thrown around a lot these days, whether it's because they don't have the advanced degrees that Christian has. I think it's kind of sometimes we think the old guard thinks like, oh, you should have a master's in public policy to do this work. You should be a lawyer to do this work. But what great mentors to me so far, and what I try to pass down to, interns and college students entering this space is that, you're in this space for a reason. There's a reason why you got the job. There's a reason why you were invited to this event. And so embrace it you know, there was a reason why you were given the position, the spot. So embrace it, and really, even if you're the only one, which I think it still happens today, even that I've seen myself in spaces that are predominantly white, I'm the only Asian woman there, or you know, it's like scrambling to find the other person of color in a networking room, like on Capitol Hill, especially. But yeah, I think encouraging a positive environment and discouraging a negative environment is really, there's a lot of reclamation of stereotypes happening these days, right? Jeanette mentions stereotypes in the chat about like the model minority, but I think as women of color, we've suffered from a long history of like, you know, either being the quiet, shy Asian women, or the scary motherly Asian women. But it's the same thing for Black women and Latinx women. And so I'm really excited about the different ways, like, you know, Gen Z and younger women of color are kind of finding different ways to reclaim these different stereotypes to really empower themselves and change the narrative. But also, I think intergenerationally, those stereotypes can still be a difficult conversation. And I think it's great that this new concept of a brave space is coming about, where really, I think Sheila mentioned it before, is change comes about because we just kept talking about it. And so I think really bringing yourself to a conversation to be brave, knowing that you may hear something quite different, something you've never really accepted or never encountered, to say, oh, that's this person's truth, and you know, let's talk it out and see where we're coming from. I guess what Christian was saying earlier, imagine yourself in their shoes, because everyone has their own truth, I think. So yeah, really, I really enjoy this new concept of a brave space, and really, I think within our organizations, with, you know, the new younger folks joining the organizing space, making sure that they know, like, this is a brave space and you're here for a reason to address those two.
Good point.
Ms. Coates?
May I say something? Yes. One factor, excuse me, one thing I'm thinking of, I'm sure all of us understands that we do not want individuals, because of the color of their skin or ethnicity, to be, because we need a quote, quote, token, as is, let's just say, the individual from the Supreme Court, just because of the color of his skin. We have to be selective about our leadership in the sense of who represents all of us, but more so women of color. Just because you're, I'm speaking specifically, a Black woman, does not necessarily mean that you are a woman of quality, that in the sense of beliefs that majority of all of us hold and the goals that they would set. You have to be cautious of that as well, too. And I see that's the thing. You just can't say, just because I was on a panel recently when the person said, oh, we have to have a Black woman in that position. May be true, but in the other sense, you want a person who's really, truly, and we have these individuals, but not just because of the color of your skin to place you in that leadership position, but because you have the qualifications, of course. And this is an old standard that folks say we were never qualified. But I just say we have to be hesitant about who the quality and the background of the individuals that we do promote too. Let's just hope all of them will be on the same level as Kamala Harris and et cetera, and the others that are in that cabinet that he so far selected. And it would not necessarily mean just because of, you know, someone, but certainly we are some of the most talented people in this country, I feel, of diverse backgrounds and diverse, and like you said, you don't have to have a triple PhD, no pun, Dr. Taylor, or any of that, because you certainly earned it. but certainly I just know by experience. And I had an 85-year-old mentor that I don't think even finished high school, but that was the wisest woman I ever knew in my life, of any of my professors at the university, anyone else. And she barely had a high school if she had that. But what a brilliant-minded woman she was, and we learned a lot from. But just always be cautious of sometimes we, as women, have been obsessed. We will become the obsessors when we get into positions of leadership. And that, to me, is an important role that we have to be mindful of all the time. We are leaders, and your leader, if you even think that you're not, like the teacher on just before in her classroom, each person has a gift and each person is unique. And if we keep that concept, we will learn how to be more acceptable in the sense of others who think and may look differently from us. It's not an easy task because it's particularly intergenerational, and through your generation and the generation, as you were talking about your sister, that's where leadership comes from, and guiding them, and that's where I see our role as the gosh, I can't believe I could say this, elders would be guiding you, and certainly I am proud. I am just one of the most proudest persons in the world to watch the younger generation just move out and just take charge, in the sense of, look at the Black Lives Matter. I've never seen so many white folk in my life come out to a social cause like that. And here in my little old downtown town of Herndon, Virginia, which was one of the most segregated KKK clown towns, and it was called a sundown town because no one of color could live in this town or be caught in this town after sundown. And the funny part about it, not funny, it was wonderful to see us have the, back in the summer, the march for for the Black Lives Matter, and see white folks lined up on the streets of Herndon with signs with kids all different ages and all different sizes of people cheering us on. Because of the virus, we're in cars. But the whole point was just exuberating for me to see that change, growth, education. So there's a lot of hope out there as far as the future is when the next generation does more in the sense of wanting to find equity. That's my spiel.
Okay, I wanted to ask, we had a couple more questions and we wanted to open it up. So I wondered if Alana would agree to our combining the two last questions. Do you mind if basically?
Nope.
Okay, I'd say the two last questions were basically, what do you see more to be done? And after these times where firsts have been achieved, how do you measure the success going forward? With so much to do, how do you, say that we're moving ahead? That's it. What measurement do you get? And let me ask Connie. I noticed a lot of people wanted contact information, and we just have the ability to write to everyone or the leaders. I guess what I'd suggest is for people to put their contact information on the chat, as well as their questions, for sharing that information among us. Don't you think that that's the best way?
Excuse me.
Holly, for everyone that came in via email, we have their emails. So only the people that are on the phone are the people that we really need to contact info from, because we only have their phone numbers.
Right, but for example, Araku, excuse me if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but you wanted the W.E. Du Bois information out. Why don't you put the contact information and anyone else in the chat for everyone? Don't you think? Okay, just what? Okay,
Whatever,
so
yeah.
all right. So do you remember my question about how do you what do you see more to do, and how do you measure it? And how do you know that you're working to achieve it? Do you want to start, Christian?
Sure. What I see is that the social justice movement is, as long as there is injustice in one group, there is always going to be a movement. So essentially, if one group of my sisters or my community is suffering, then there's always work to do. We are not living in a siloed movement. We cannot work in a siloed movement. We cannot stop working if there is, like, if my Indigenous sisters are suffering, I have work to do. We have work to do. If Black lives are still being murdered in the street, now has work to do. Latinx women, immigrant women, if there are still issues, I mean, there's children still in cages, we have work to do. I'm just saying, so I feel like as long as there are issues that are happening, we cannot stop the work. We can't assume that we're in a sellout movement. Even if the ERA is ratified, the deadlines are moved, that's one that may be resolved, but we still have a lot of support issues. As long as there's oppression, there's structural racism happening in this world, and people are still oppressed, there are still homeless women, there's still a gender wage gap, you know, there is still work that has to be done. So until we have eradicated and gotten rid of the root causes that cause oppression, that contribute to the suffrage of women, I think there's work that has to be done. And I think we have to look at it that way. You know, this is deeper than just the surface level to me. These are root causes that are built into the systems of the United States and to our structures of our framework of the United States. And we have a lot of work to do in that sense. And this takes like a rebuilding of American the systems of America. It's institutional, it's structural, and we have to look at it. We have to look at white privilege, we have to look at white supremacy, we have to look at institutional racism, we have to look at all those things. And once we challenge, those things are dismantled, and that takes a lot of time because this is hundreds of years, you know, and oppression is you know, resolved, then I think then we can say that we have done away with oppression. But we have to look at, like, is that doable overnight? Is that doable when majority of the Americans' income is in 6% of the population hands controlled? So I think we have to, it's deeper than that. But I think we can continue to make progress. And I think we have to continue to work toward that. We will not stop until we see the progress that we want. I believe I'm an optimistic person, I'm a hopeful person. I don't think we don't stop until we continue to work toward the progress. We've seen a lot of advancement. We've seen a lot of things, like right now we're seeing so many more women elected than ever. You know, right now we're seeing control of the House and Senate. We're seeing a Senate majority led by progressives and Democrats. Whether you're, I know it's nonpartisan, I'm just saying, but we're seeing favor for for things that are more in favor of the people right now. So I think that we can say that there is hope. And like we're seeing Madam Vice President Kamala Harris, the first woman ever elected in history, and she's a woman of color. I mean, this is amazing for many of us, you know. So this is history that's being made, and it's just progress. And I think, and this is because of votes, this is because of organizing, it's because of community organizing, it's because people turned out and showed up, and people didn't take no for an answer. So I think if we continue to have that attitude and we continue to work hard, there's no stopping us, but we have to continue to organize and work together. And we have to continue to be in solidarity and work in movements. We can't stop at that. And I think that's what we have to do. But we also have to continue to have support. And I think for our movement of feminists and women's organizations, we have to get behind all groups, and we can't just, like, we have to get behind the groups that are leading movements. We have to be inclusive of person of color groups and marginalized groups as well. And we have to like let them lead and be and follow them in the movements that we know that they're good at. That's what I would say.
So just for clarification, Christian, this is Alana Taylor. Are you saying we measure success or improvements by being more collaborative? Or I guess I would
Yes.
think, I'm saying, do we set goals? Do we measure? How do we measure all of this? I mean, what?
Well, I think
do you
that we
really plan for stuff or what?
so
how
I
do
think
you
I'm sorry. We have to be more collaborative. That's the first. We definitely have to be more collaborative. That is definitely the only way we can succeed. We can't be siloed. That's the first. How we are going to measure success? I think we'll measure success. I guess I'm kind of stuck on this part, but the only way I can say we'll measure success is how we see improvements in like the dismantling of systems of oppression. That's what I guess I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
So as we move, as we see like more systems breaking down, as we see decrease, as we see like a decrease in different systems of oppression, or we see like more, the gender wage gap, for instance, closing based on color and the gender wage gap decreasing, that's a measure of success for us.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying? I think that's where I'll see our measurements, like things that we can actually like quantitatively measure will be like a way of being able to tell that there's progress being made.
Okay, thank you.
And Thu, you want to?
I think first, I also want to flag that amongst the traditional like measures of success for our movements, to think about how our world is changing. And what I mean by that is I'm referring to the digital divide and digital literacy and access to technology, whether that's access to internet connection and devices, because and just along those lines, how our world is changing and how different basic needs are expanding to include things like technology. And so I think it's always important to keep in mind also that we also need to fight for women and families of color and marginalized families to be connected to the internet and have access to those kinds of resources as well. And I also think that when we talk about change, I like to think of it as a change in institutional change, which is more like policy, legislative related, but also a cultural change. I think we've seen in the past 4 years, the culture of America is kind of largely founded upon like white supremacy and white nationalism. And so I think there needs to be both policy change and changing people. Policy and change people. And I think it's important to do that actually at the same time. And so what I also really want to put that, what Sheila was mentioning earlier, how we as women organizers, we can be encouraging and advocating for the people around us to continuously get involved somehow, whether that's within your small business. Small businesses like are firsthand on the grounds in the community. They create these spaces that people are in. And so to the kind of culture that a small business, whether it's, a donut shop, coffee shop, restaurant, bar, nail salon, things like that, the kind of culture that you're creating in your small business is contributing to the culture in your community and in our country at the end of the day. And so, I think we really should be, pushing our friends and family around us to also always keep in mind this culture of change and being positive and inclusive in all kinds of environments. And I think as for measure of success, I just want to see success as not the same 5 people are being called on to represent X community at an event, right? It always seems like, an Asian woman who's an author at, this event. Actually, Minjin Lee, who wrote Pachinko and Finding Food Millionaires, is great, but they're beyond that. We need like a Black male author to speak up. Okay, like Ta-Nehisi Coates is great. There are other Black male authors out there too. So I think when folks are educated enough and there's more visibility that Sheila keeps talking about, like you don't call in the same 5 people to represent X community. There's more out there.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So I guess right now we have about 15 minutes left, and we would like to open it up for some questions. But Ms.
Excuse
Coates,
me, Dr. Taylor, you didn't ask me.
I just said, Ms. Coates, you're next.
I'm sitting here loving every minute of this. Listen, I'm sorry. I'll be good. But I'm kidding you, of course.
Yeah.
But it was just heartwarming to listen to Christian and to think about how do you measure whether you can see growth or change. One of the things I want to say, and sincerely, is kudos to you, the CWI. This is the way I feel. And you may think it's just something that you're just doing, looking at, what was it, racism and women and collaborating. This is the start too. This is the beginning. When we hang up from today, will we have learned anything new? Excuse me, would we have been exposed to anything? But it had to take mindsets like yours and Connie and your team to put together this event over the last hour and a half to talk, to discuss. We learned from each other through education. I'm a firm believer, but also by hearing. I've learned things just from yesterday to today, hearing about different opinions. You open up. So what can we do? You tell someone else, you talk to someone else, and when you see something that isn't right, speak. Like, well, what can you do? Well, write letters to that individual. For instance, I brought about that morning talk show, which was highlighting 50 women over 50 with Forbes magazine, and it was all white women. And my thought was, how can you do this in today's time? Well, if no one suggests to you that maybe you could have added, or perhaps it would not have been looking at it from a different perspective. And what it told me was that the last person to have seen it before it went on TV had to be mindset of the lady that presented it. Because if you don't have diversity, perhaps you would not see that maybe the millions of us that look at this would be thinking, oh, it's only the majority woman, huh? Not thinking about the contributions we all gave and we all continue to do over, and for Forbes, I could have written to both of them and say, wait a minute, let's look at this from a different perspective. It's 51% this country, women, but diverse women is included in there. But again, if we don't say something, as was, I think it was Connie on yesterday, one of us talked about, not having the judgeship, and so you spoke about it, and then hopefully it'll bring about change. I know it's possible, because there is no way we would have achieved what we did in Black Women United without voicing the opinion or voice and saying, let's look at this, let's look at that. And you do measure it when you can sit back and take an aha moment and look back, you're like, oh, yes, we did do that. We did. But not one person. It's a combination of sharing information that you think and is not right and inclusive. You say something about it. So I think that's the positive.
I think
that's my spiel. Huh?
Silence is agreement. That's why I must never be silent.
Yes. Correct. Absolutely. And we're complacent when we don't. And I know everyone cannot always be the person to speak out, because economics alone won't allow you to say, you can't go up in your job and say what you really feel necessarily, and then still maintain a job. You have to
I
be.
disagree with that.
You have to learn. Who said that? They disagree?
I'm sorry. My name is
Did you
Andrea
say
Baptiste.
Okay, okay.
No.
Okay.
I love it.
We need to,
Well,
But
what
anyway.
I'm saying, because I'm 68 years old. I was originally, I was from California. I live in New Orleans now, but
Okay.
I was in finance. And so I was typically the only Black woman. And so they always used to say, you're an exception. But I wasn't an exception. It was just that we were not included. But I never bought into that because I was raised with a mother who was saying you can do anything.
Anything.
So I never saw color. And I'm just being honest. It's not that I don't know that you're Asian, Japanese. It's just that it's being able to realize that how am I going to be accepted in this environment, especially when it's a predominantly male environment. Male,
white, yeah.
okay.
And so it is, and the other thing is for as women, we do need to do that, not for our children, whether they're male or female, so that they understand, that we understand that we are part, that we have the knowledge and the ability to be part of different corporations. And sometimes you do have to speak up. You may not want to, but that's the only way. And I think that's what's happened. I mean, when we think about this last election, especially with Stacey Abrams, oh my God.
Oh, yes.
And so we all have to realize we have to get involved. And part of it too is making sure you vote.
Yes. And to protect our young people like that too.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Connie.
I'm sorry, Alana. I got carried away.
No, that's good. No, that's all good.
I did too.
Holly, or who's going to facilitate? We have time for a few questions. Are they going to just unmute themselves?
It's interesting because I can't figure out that there are a lot of interesting things that came out in chat. I just want to say before anyone leaves that I see this as an ongoing discussion, and I hope we'll be able to continue this as well because it was so good. And I just want to thank our panelists. You can see how wonderful they were. And it dawned on me at this time that Sheila worked kind of locally, and Christian and two are kind of in organizations that are national. I mean, and from the people here have worked personally in different ways. I mean, we really do have a great group of panelists and attendees. So I just want to acknowledge that. Would someone like to, and let's
Karen.
see. Karen, I see Karen's, is this Karen Gale? Oh, speak.
Yes,
Tell
it's Karen
us about the diversity checklist.
Well, hi and good afternoon, everyone. I have a diversity checklist that I use, and I use it as a measurement tool whenever I enter into a meeting and decisions are being made. And if I'm at the table, and generally we've heard that diversity and inclusion basically means that you're asked to dance and participate if you're going to be at the table. But when I'm being mansplained, white woman-splained away as a Black woman sitting at the table, I tend to pull out my diversity checklist and say, well, are we including people of color in this, and so forth and so on. And I think that if we use that as a measurement tool, it'll be helpful to make sure that there's no disparate treatment to people in any of the communities, boardrooms, media releases, anytime we're interacting with people. That's just my suggestion.
I've got to bring up a downside of Zoom, I find, in the chat room. I'm all pumped up at the end of a meeting and want to say something, even if it's just thanks, and the meeting ends. I wonder if we could give a generic email for a contact if people have ideas and thoughts afterwards. do we have a generic CWI email? I'd be happy to take the calls on my personal one, but would you remember it? It's, do we have a better one?
Holly, I can just put the media one in there.
Media, great. Okay, give the media one.
And,
oh, and then
also I see Diana C. Hodge has her hand up.
has a okay, I don't see her hand, so good. Please, please, Diana, go for it.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies. My name is Diana C. Hodge. I'm with the Northern Virginia section of the National Council with Negro Women. But as a former businesswoman, I want to say, Sheila, Sheila, you know me from back.
Yes, nice to hear you.
Would you agree? We talked about women of all color collaborating together to accomplish common goals. But would you agree that women, not only of all color, but all ages as well as color, come together and respect the perspective from each age and from whatever diversity you come from, organization or business or whatever color you may be, respect one another and their difference of opinion, because you can merge them together and come out with something great. Because we're not just looking at color, and we're not looking at just the young people, and we're not just looking at the older people, but I think the blending of all of it can make something terrific and great. Would you agree with that?
Of course.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. We're stronger in commonality than we are in differences, in difference. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I want to share something. I was glued to the inauguration, and as were many people that I knew, but they didn't see one part that I saw that is just really worth sharing. I mean, who ever heard white supremacy uttered at an inauguration before? I think that that's quite telling of the, the mindset of the new administration. And the second thing was when the president, I've lost the word, when he swore in the thousands of civil servants that he was swearing in. Did you see that? Most people didn't see it. He said he didn't want to hear of anyone talking down or demeaning anyone. And if they did, they would be fired on the spot. His pledge. Yeah. I thought this is revolutionary, isn't it? I just thought that was unbelievable. So I wanted to note that in case anyone missed it, because I thought that was a high point. So anyway, well, we took
there's definitely a benchmark to start off the administration, because if we don't use those type of tools, because the old paradigm has to get out of the door, and that old way of thinking, it needs to be changed. That toxic
we have to protect
that we went through, everybody has to heal from it, and there needs to be a firm starting ground on where we begin our healing. And if we continue to perpetuate the madness that we went through, people are going to consistently suffer over and over again. So I'm glad that he laid down the ground rules of this is what we expect. And the enforcement of those ground rules is what I want to see him, see how he carries that out. Because otherwise, it'll be the same, thing as usual. But I think he's going to be really, really effective as a president.
Okay. Well, look, we have about 3 minutes left. Holly, you wrapping? Connie? Sue? Who's wrapping?
I'd like to announce our next meeting. Our former co-president, Harriet Stonehill, is going to do an exciting meeting. It's called Wise Aging, Activist Participation in the Arts in Our Senior Years. And you all are invited, and Harriet is listening in, but I don't think she can, is hooked in to say anything.
I would personally like to I'd like to personally thank all the panelists.
February 23rd.
Mute. Okay.
I said I'd like to personally thank all the panelists and attendees today. And of course, this was Holly's baby. So Holly, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you all. I know that you appreciate the speakers and the organization. I want to be sure also, because the chat can get out of your view. Sherry pointed out the email for further conversation is media@womensclearinghouse.org. So thank you all very much, and we hope to see you again. Thank you.
Okay.
And keep the conversation going. Thanks.
Thank you
for
all.
having us. It was great meeting everybody.
Bye-bye.